there was a quote that was said to me at a very young age. I'm not African because I was born in Africa. I'm African because Africa's born in me. Well, my name is Darrel Blake. I am a proud black person, first and foremost. But mainly, my cape represents knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Come a perspective from Black history. So, as a social activist, I believe in telling stories and narratives and hidden legacies on a societal level that has been neglected or obscured essentially from the general public. Okay. Alongside that, I am a strong believer in the development and literally growth of Africa. My main kind of mantra is Africa for the Africans, home and abroad. That's coming from Marcus Messiah Garvey. My parents are from Barbados and Jamaica, and I've been able to do a thorough study where I found my earliest ancestor from Barbados, who they renamed Sarah after they baptized her under the Church of England, and she was taken from the Calabar region of Nigeria. So Sarah's mother and was taken from there with her and brought over to Barbados to an area called St. Andrew. The ship that had my earliest ancestor had a collective a group of the Igbo tribe on board as well.
How did you go about getting this information?
Well, it took about 9 years in total, going back and forth from well, essentially the UK to Barbados, going to Black Rock Archives, which unfortunately last year the National Archives in Barbados got burnt down. And that essentially, outside of Jamaica, Barbados probably has the best kept records from the 1600s upwards. But unfortunately, it's burnt down. So I was quite fortunate enough to do my research prior to that tragic event. So going to the Black Rock Archives in Barbados, going to Kew Garden Records here, and also doing some online research, I was able to cross-reference the data from Barbados and here. And there's also a lot of literature out there that's written by enslavers as well, which I was able to correlate the information. So I was able to use my grandmother's line and grandfather's line quite effectively to trace back the surnames and then to trace back the first names through marriages, through deaths, and through baptism records. But the records stop at a certain point, which is the early 1800s. So between 1801 and 1810, because that's when the census came out. They had introduced the census 225 years ago. So prior to that, you have to go through other records, which is you look at slave registers, and then you can kind of look at the ages of the individuals that's on the plantations. And then they will list Negro, Creole, African, things of that nature. And then you have to trace back the transactions that were made. And then you have to trace the owner who owned the property, who was paying the mortgage on the land. And then when they purchase people, you have to cross-reference the slave registers to see if anybody's died or been born since the last one. And then if anybody's been born, then you calculate how old were the people that were on the plantation, usually the women. And then if they're too young to have had a child, then they would have brought someone over if there's been an increase in plantation members. And then you then trace back the slave ships that were bringing in and things of that nature. So you have to go through court records. It's a whole list of stuff, but it's deep. It's sad at the same time because you then realize my ancestors essentially were a commodity. They were literally cattle. And historically, the first stocks and bonds in the UK was African lives. The first stock was livestock, which is West Africans that were taken from the region today that we will call Senegal and the Gambia. And then the essential idea of bondage, being bonded by change, that's where you get the idea of stocks and bonds. So the first stocks was Africans that were taken from West Africa, especially from the group that we call the Wolof group today. And it was brought over to here in the mid 1500s. So we've always, in the eyes of the Europeans, and especially Britain, we've always been looked at as animals or items or things that can be purchased or bought or sold. So going through the data is interesting, but it's sad to know that I know the conditions that my ancestors went through. So that's the Barbados side. And then you have my Jamaica side, where my surname is Blake, which was derives from a Scottish plantation owner, Blake, who lived in a place not too far from Glasgow, essentially. And he was able to make a lot of money, even though he didn't live in Jamaica. He lived in the area that he lived in Scotland. And however, he got a group of people who he purchased from what we know as the Ashanti Kingdom. So my bloodline goes to Igbo, and the other line is a part of the Ashanti Kingdom. So my job is to retell the story, retell the legacies, and make sure that I make my ancestors proud and let them know that I'm here and I'm fighting for your name.
That's something that anyone would, every average person without that historical background can kind of pick up and find their lineage. How easy is that for the average person to do?
It's tedious work because also as Africans, we are like oral tellers, right? We tell stories. We don't really write things down. Well, historically, we didn't. So, unfortunately, some of our records, you have to go through the British Empire. And they have a lot, but they don't have everything. So sometimes you will hit a brick wall and you might be deflated, but you just have to keep trying. So I've hit many brick walls where, for example, spelling mistakes were made. And also, on the plantations, my ancestors couldn't read and write. So when there was a marriage that was done during slavery, for example, someone wrote their name and they had to put an X. If you look at any old documentation, and then whether it's a birth certificate or a marriage certificate, if there's an X in the signature department, that means the person couldn't read and write. So someone wrote the name and then they just confirmed it. So a lot of the documents that are connected to my ancestors essentially were written by white people on the plantations. Let's be fair. So it's tedious work when I say, because it's tiring, because you will hit brick walls along the way, but you just have to continue and just understand that ancestors are there and, you know, supporting you and guiding you along the way. But literally anybody can do it. You just gotta have the time, the dedication, and the will to want to know more. So growing up as a young black boy here in the UK, school was okay, but I didn't really see myself in the text, especially history. So learning about British kings and, you know, queens, obviously it's the British national curriculum we're going to, but I felt as though they were lying a little bit, and I couldn't prove it at a young age. I couldn't. For example, Queen Elizabeth I, they would say that she was a great monarch and she, you know, really pioneered England to become like the face of like this new nation that was growing through the seas. And that's what I learned in school. However, when I started to attend something called Pan-African Saturday schools, that's where I learned about the real atrocities of colonialism. And then I was able to see the beautiful side of Africa, because being, you know, born in the 80s, growing up in the 90s, the image of Africa was considered quite negative through TV, because it was usually charity events and things like that, and adverts that were highlighted, and a lot of people in the Caribbean, or Caribbean descent anyway, kind of disconnected from Africa, right? Because they were obviously brainwashed. However, through the Saturday school, the first person I learned about was Kwame Nkrumah. And reading that quote still resonates with me today. And we're going, you know, way over 20 years.
Just for the viewers, explain who that is.
Okay, so Kwame Nkrumah is arguably, he's in my Mount Rushmore of black leaders. When I say that, it's because Kwame Nkrumah being the first literal, effective anyway, but first president of Ghana, who was also someone who was a supporter of Marcus Messiah Garvey. When Ghana got the independence in 1957, they had this moment where they were designing flags. And you had red, you've got gold, and you've got green on the flag. But in the middle, you have the black star. And the black star is in sort of like a memory of Marcus Messiah Garvey's Black Star Line Shipping Company, where he created his own sort of business where he said, we don't have to wait for colonial powers to bring in our own goods. Let's control our own services and our own goods. So we're going to have imports and exports via the Black Star Line Shipping Company. Marcus Messiah Garvey also was the creator of the red, black, and green flag. Red for the blood, black for the ancestors of the people, and green for the nutrition of the earth, right? That flag inspired the Ghanaian flag, inspired the Kenyan flag, inspired the Malawi flag, inspired the Biafran flag, inspired the St. Kitts flag, so on and so forth. There was a quote that was said to me at a very young age, going back 30 years, where it says, I'm not African because I was born in Africa. I'm African because Africa's born in me. And I've held on to that quote by Kwame Nkrumah. He was hated by the West. When I say West, I say Europe, because of what his vision for Africa represented, and who he was rubbing shoulders with. Certain elite people who were for the Black Power movement. And from then, I've kind of always found a way through academia, going to secondary school, to find my own purpose and my own stories and legacies in this place that we call Britain. I was then getting to the early ages of 20. I was then a part of a pirate radio station that was called Genesis Radio back in the day, 92.6. And I used to host a talk show every Sunday called The People's Talk Show. And it was like he had live callings and things of that nature. And it was run by a gentleman named Dennis Rowe, who was a good friend of my father's. And it was literally being on the radio station and having live callers calling or the general public to calling to discuss their issues, talk about Black history, where I learned to kind of like cut my teeth to deal with the general public, but also to research. Every week, come with some new information, come with some new facts, because there are people out there in the public who I've never met, who don't know me, don't know my face, but they're relying on me to keep them entertained for 4 hours every Sunday. Being a part of the community has always been my hub, always to give back, whether it's to young people, whether it's to our generation or even older. Always find a way to give back, because collectively, this is how we win. Too many of us are moving like individual digits, but if we can collectively come together and make a fist, the impact is a lot stronger. So my job is to be a historian, but also an educator on social studies, Black studies, but also to let people know that myself, for example, I'm from South London, born and raised in Brixton, moved to Norwood. I've been to Cambridge, I've been to Oxford, I've had debates and haven't lost, speaking about the Commonwealth. And I want people to realize that it doesn't matter where you come from. Don't let people in the ivory tower make you feel like you don't belong in certain spaces. Imposter syndrome needs to be over and done with. We belong in every space, because technically our blood, sweat, and tears from our ancestors built this nation that we call Britain today. So my job is to highlight certain bits of information that I found and bring it to the general public for everybody. So someone recently called me the Black Robin Hood. Well, I steal the rich information from the rich and give it to those who are unfortunate in society. So yeah, call myself the Black Robin Hood. So the tour is called the City of London Slave Trade Money Trail Tour. And the purpose of the tour is to follow the colonial residue from a financial standpoint that has been left in the City of London. When we walk around anywhere, we tend to be on our phones and we're looking down. We don't really look up and see what's above, top of buildings, top of pediments, statues, monuments, things of that nature. There are a lot of stories and celebrated legacies of colonial masters in the City of London, because the City of London is literally the financial district of the world. I know people like to pretend like, USA is the greatest nation on the planet. It's not. There are 3 sisters, they call them sisters, researchers anyway, historians call them the sisters. There are 3 sisters that run the world. You've got the financial sister, which is the City of London. You've got the military sister, which is Washington, D.C. And then you've got the political and religious sister, which is the Vatican. Those 3 nations run the world, okay? The City of London, being the financial sister and the strongest area as its own city, literally is the way it is today because of the transatlantic slave trade. So darted around the city of London, I am there to show you these buildings and what they mean, because sometimes they have these pretty plaques outside. I'm here to show you what it says, read between the lines, because they like to, pretty it up. And carved into walls, there are certain concepts that are related to the slave trade. And my job is to tell you the truth. You take the information and you spread the word, essentially. So it's a 3-hour tour, but it goes very, very, very quickly. And from start to finish, there was loads of information. I don't stop. So sometimes we go overtime because people want more. But my duty is to highlight the information, show it to everybody, but also bring people into these spaces to have these conversations. I feel my responsibility is to have a space for people to have discourse on colonialism, because sometimes they can't do it at home or in their workspace or in academia. So my job is to create an area where we all come together and we have a sound mind that we're going to learn something, and it's a space where anybody can ask questions and feel free to express whether they agree or disagree. So far, I haven't heard anybody disagree with what I said. So, and that's due to me dealing with facts. I don't deal with emotions. Emotions have to put to a side. I only talk about two things. One, something that I've researched really well, or something that I'm really passionate about. If I do not know enough information about it, I will cast it aside. I'm not too sure. But if I've studied it well, I'm going to let you know what it is. This is what I felt. This is what I've learned. And I literally on the tour, I have resources. So you can see where I got my information from as well. And you can extend that if you desire.